At its peak, Hornby employed 2,000 workers at a factory in Margate, Kent. They built the model trains that sat under Christmas trees across Britain, 3 iconic brands from one company known in every household in the land. Then the manufacturing went to China. The sole Chinese factory was bought by the competition. The zinc alloy rotted. Models crumbled to powder on collectors' shelves. 8 years of consecutive losses, delisted from the stock exchange. Today, Hornby rents a small office in the factory it once filled. 230 miles southwest, in a fishing village called Beer, a family company called Peco refused to leave. 3 generations of Pritchards. The same Devon workforce. Aerospace-grade machinery cutting to 1/100th of a millimetre. The world's largest manufacturer of model railway track. Debt-free, exporting to 35 countries from a village of 1,283 people. This is the story of 2 tracks through British manufacturing, one that led to China and one that never left Devon. The question isn't which one failed. The question is why anyone believed there was only one choice. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Played Truant. The story begins, as so many stories of British invention do, with a boy who couldn't sit still. Frank Hornby was born on May 15th, 1863 at 77 Copperers Hill, Liverpool, the only son among 3 children of John Oswald Hornby, a provision merchant, and Martha Hornby, née Tomlinson. He spoke with a Scouse accent all his life. He disliked school with an intensity that went well beyond ordinary childhood restlessness. He played truant frequently, and he left at 16, having concluded that whatever he needed to know wasn't going to come from a classroom. What he needed to know came from a book. Samuel Smiles's Self-Help, published in 1859, was the Victorian gospel of practical perseverance. The idea that genius mattered less than graft, that ordinary men could build extraordinary things if they simply refused to stop. Frank Hornby read it over and over again. It became the engine of his ambition. He married Clara Walker Godefroy, a schoolteacher, on January 15th, 1887. They had 3 children, Roland, Douglas and Patricia. When Frank's father died in 1899, he took a position as bookkeeper for David Hugh Elliott, who ran a meat importing firm in Liverpool. It was steady, respectable, unremarkable work. And every evening, Frank Hornby went home to his workshop and built toys for his sons out of tinplate. The workshop was where the insight arrived. Hornby realised that perforated metal strips with regularly spaced holes could function as universal construction components, that any model, any structure, any machine could be assembled from a set of interchangeable parts. It was an engineering principle applied to play, and it was, in the truest sense, revolutionary. On January 9th, 1901, Frank filed British patent GB1901/587. He borrowed £5 from Elliott to cover the fee, the equivalent of 3 weeks' wages for a skilled worker. Elliott became his business partner. In 1902, the product launched as Mechanics-Made Easy, priced at 7 shillings and sixpence. In 1903, 1,500 sets sold, but made no profit. The first small profit didn't arrive until 1906. Frank Hornby was 43 years old, and he had been working at this for the better part of a decade. Then came the name. In September 1907, Hornby registered the trademark Meccano, thought to derive from make and know. On 30 May 1908, Meccano Limited was formally incorporated. Professor Henry Selby Healshaw, head of engineering at Liverpool University, provided an endorsement that Hornby exploited relentlessly in his marketing, lending academic credibility to a product that was, at heart, a brilliant toy dreamed up by a man with no formal education. By 1910, turnover had reached £12,000. Frank Hornby was building something real. The famous Binns Road factory in Old Swan, Liverpool, entered full production in September 1914. The site covered approximately 5 acres, expanding eventually to as much as 11. By 1928, over 1,200 workers walked through its gates. During the 1920s and 1930s, That number reached approximately 2,000. The boy who'd played truant from school was now running one of the largest toy manufacturing operations in the world, from a factory in the city where he'd been born. And he was about to do something that would change Christmas in Britain forever. Chapter 2. The Trains That Changed Christmas. The First World War created a vacuum that Frank Hornby was perfectly positioned to fill. German manufacturers, Bing and Märklin, had dominated the European model railway market for decades. When the Board of Trade encouraged British firms to replace enemy imports, Hornby saw the opportunity with the same clarity he'd brought to perforated metal strips. Around 1920, the first Hornby clockwork train appeared. O-gauge, 1/48 scale, enamelled tin plate, powered by high-quality clockwork motors. The inaugural locomotive was a simple freelance 040 numbered 2710, available in Great Northern Green, Midland Red, and London and Northwestern Black. It wasn't the most sophisticated model train ever made. It didn't need to be. What it needed to be was affordable and British, and it was both. The timing was exquisite. Post-war patriotic sentiment ran against German-made toys. British families were rebuilding. And here was a model train, a mechanical, tangible, endlessly fascinating thing, that an ordinary father could afford to place under the Christmas tree for his son. Within a decade, Hornby trains were outselling Meccano itself. The tail was wagging the dog. Electric trains followed from 1925, initially running at a frankly dangerous 100 to 250 volts of mains supply, a detail that tends to alarm modern readers. By 1932, a safer 3-rail 20-volt AC system was established. The pinnacle of the O-gauge era was the 1937 Stanier. Princess Royal Pacific, number 6201 Princess Elizabeth, in LMS Crimson Lake livery, a model that collectors still revere as one of the finest tinplate locomotives ever produced in Britain. In parallel, another empire was growing. Small die-cast accessories launched in 1931 as Hornby modelled miniatures and were renamed Dinky Toys by 1935. Using the new Mazak die-cast alloy, a zinc alloy with aluminium, magnesium and copper, Meccano Limited held the British market for die-cast vehicles virtually to themselves for over a decade. Frank Hornby had created not one iconic brand, but 3: Meccano, Hornby Trains and Dinky Toys. All from the same Binns Road factory, all manufactured in Liverpool. Frank entered politics in 1931 as Conservative MP for Everton, though his parliamentary career was, by all accounts, undistinguished. He stood down at the 1935 general election. He died on 21 September 1936, aged 73, at the David Lewis Hospital in Liverpool, from chronic heart disease complicated by diabetes. By then he was a millionaire, chauffeured daily from his Maghull mansion to the factory floor. His elder son, Roland Hornby, became chairman. George Jones, the marketing man, became managing director. Frank left behind a workforce of 2,000, a factory complex of 11 acres, and 3 product lines that had woven themselves into the fabric of British childhood. 2 years after his death, his company launched what would become British Model Railway's defining format. Hornby Doublow appeared in 1938, O-gauge, approximately half the size of O-gauge, at the scale of 4 mm to the foot. The first 2 locomotives were an LNER Class N 2062T and the blue streamlined LNERA 4 Pacific Sir Nigel Gresley. The track sections were engineered with drawn brass rails on raised metal bases, described by those who handled them as almost like pieces of jewellery. Here was the moment that set the course of British model railways for the next 90 years. O-gauge used a slightly larger scale than the continental HO standard, 4 mm to the foot versus 3.5, because British locomotive outlines are smaller and more compact than their European counterparts, and the extra ½ millimetre gave designers the internal space they needed for motors. It was a pragmatic decision born of engineering reality, and it locked Britain into its own standard, separate from the rest of the world. Every O-gauge model bought today descends from that 1938 choice. Then the war came, and everything stopped. Wartime legislation ceased all toy production in 1939. The Binns Road factory manufactured munitions. Despite the Liverpool Blitz, which devastated the city centre and killed nearly 4,000 people, the factory in Old Swan was not damaged. Post-war recovery was slow. Hornby 00 sets didn't return to sale until 1947. The Korean War interrupted production again in 1950 due to metal shortages. But even as Meccano Limited resumed trading, something had shifted. Competition was arriving that the company had never known, and it came from the most unlikely of sources, a former racing driver and a high street department store. Chapter 3. The Wars for 00 Gauge. Alexander Gregory Venetsian was a man of Armenian background who had reportedly once been a racing driver for Mercedes-Benz. In 1946, he founded Rovex Plastics Limited, making plastic toys for Marks and Spencer. For Christmas 1950, his company produced something that sent a quiet tremor through the model railway world. The Princess Set electric train sold through M&S for £2, 17 shillings and sixpence. About half the price of anything comparable from Hornby. Lines Brothers Limited noticed. Founded in 1919 by three sons of Joseph Lines, three lines forming a triangle, hence the brand name Tri-ang, Lines Brothers was already the world's largest toy manufacturer, operating from a 47-acre factory complex in Merton, South London. They purchased Rovex in 1951 and began marketing the trains as Tri-ang Railways. In the summer of 1954, Rovex scale models moved to a brand new purpose-built factory at Westwood Industrial Estate, Margate, Kent. The surrounding land was cabbage fields. Richard Lines, son of founder Arthur, was largely responsible for developing the Tri-ang Railways system. What emerged from those Kent fields was a direct assault on everything Meccano had built. Tri-ang Railways produced affordable plastic 00 gauge trains, bright, cheerful, mass-produced, and priced for the ordinary family. Hornby 00's costlier metal and tin plate construction, beautiful as it was, simply couldn't compete on price. The market shifted under Meccano's feet. At the Margate factory's peak, approximately 2,000 people worked across 3 shifts during the Christmas run-up. The cabbage fields had become one of Kent's largest employers. By 1964, Meccano Limited was on the brink of collapse. Production of Hornby 00 at Binns Road had already ceased, with unsold stock piling up in the warehouses. On 14th February 1964, Valentine's Day. Though there was nothing romantic about it, Lines Brothers purchased the full share capital of Meccano Limited for £781,000. The combined railway was marketed as Tri-ang Hornby from 1965. Hornby 00 tooling was sold to G&R Wren. The last members of the Hornby family were removed from office. The name survived. The dynasty did not. Then Lines Brothers themselves fell. They reported a record £4.5 million loss in 1970 and went into voluntary liquidation on the 19th of August 1971. At their peak, they'd owned 40 companies worldwide. The model railway division was sold to Dunby Convex Marks, and on January 1st, 1972, the brand became simply Hornby Railways, production continuing at Margate. The Great Binns Road factory in Liverpool finally closed in November 1979. 65 years after it had opened, and 4 decades after Frank Hornby's death. A management buyout in 1981 created an independent Hornby Hobbies. The company floated on the London Stock Exchange in 1986. The Margate factory was still making trains. British workers were still assembling them. And for a brief window, Hornby looked like a company that had weathered every storm the 20th century could throw at it. What nobody could have predicted was that the greatest threat wouldn't come from a competitor, from a corporate raider, or from a changing market. It would come from a quiet decision about where to make things. Chapter 4. A coupling in Devon, 230 miles southwest of Margate, in a part of England where the lanes narrow to a single car's width and the hedgerows close overhead like tunnels. A very different story was taking shape. Sidney Pritchard grew up in London with a lifelong passion for model trains. During the war, he made munitions at a discreet location in Branscombe. a village tucked into the red sandstone cliffs of East Devon, chosen for its remoteness and invisibility. When peace came, Pritchard didn't return to London. He stayed in Devon and turned his attention to the thing he loved. On April 17, 1946, Sidney and his wife Claudine incorporated the Pritchard Patent Product Company. The name told you everything. Pritchard had designed and engineered a unique coupling device for the Hornby 00 railway system, a small, precise, clever thing, and he'd arranged for a patent. Ironically, it was Meccano of Liverpool, Hornby's own parent company, who adopted the coupling for their 00 locomotives. Sales soared. The nickname Peco evolved through the habitual British compression of syllables into PECO. The company started in Branscombe, moved to Sidmouth, then to Seaton, before building a purpose-built production facility in Beer in the early 1970s. The factory was officially opened in 1973. Beer, a seaside fishing village and civil parish in East Devon, facing Lyme Bay on the Jurassic coast. Population at the last census, 1,283. The name derives from the Old English Bearu, meaning grove. It sits 9 miles from the nearest railway station at Axminster, tucked into a cove visible only from far out at sea. Queen Victoria's wedding lace flounce was crafted here in 1839 by Miss Jane Bidney and 200 workers. Beerstone has been quarried since Roman times and used in 24 cathedrals, including Exeter, Westminster Abbey and St Paul's. Fishing boats are still winched up the shingle beach by hand. This is where Peco chose to make products exported to over 35 countries. A factory on a hillside above a fishing village looking out over the Jurassic coast to Portland Bill. As far from a Chinese industrial zone as the imagination can stretch. Sidney Pritchard's early products were component parts for model railways and HO/OO, ready-made track with fibre sleepers. The real transformation came in the 1960s with the Streamline range, precision-engineered model railway track using solid nickel-silver rail, offering electrical conductivity and corrosion resistance that brass couldn't match. The turnouts featured positive over-centre spring action on tie bars, points that worked straight from the box, no fiddling, no extra levers. Rails were integrally moulded into plastic sleeper bases for realism and structural strength. Flexible track came in 3-foot lengths, usable for any radius curve or straight run. It was the kind of product that won its market not through marketing or price warfare, but through the quiet, accumulating verdict of people who used it every day. Modellers tried PECO track, found it reliable, found it precise, found that it simply worked, and never bought anything else. Peco remained private, family-owned. Now in its third generation, under Chairman Charles Michael Pritchard, who became a director in 1992. The managing director is James Henry Ben Robarts Arnold, appointed in 2001. There are no external shareholders demanding quarterly results, no stock market pressure to chase margins, no boardroom debates about whether Devon labour costs could be undercut by Guangdong province. And from 1949, Peco published Railway Modeller, Britain's best-selling model railway magazine, with a circulation of approximately 30,000 copies per month. It functioned as a direct channel to the hobbyist market, driving awareness and demand while maintaining editorial independence. Nearly all articles were written by readers themselves. It was community and commerce braided together month after month for over 75 years. While Hornby lurched from owner to owner, Meccano to Lines Brothers to Dunby Convex Marks to management buyout to public listing, Peco stayed in Devon, invested in better machines, trained the same workers year after year, and quietly became the world's largest manufacturer of model railway track. Nobody wrote breathless profiles. Nobody tracked a share price. The Pritchard family just kept making things, in a village where everybody knew their name. The two companies occupied the same hobby, served the same customers, competed in the same market, but they were building on entirely different foundations. And it would take a crisis to reveal which foundation was stone and which was sand. Chapter 5. The Empire at its Height. To understand the scale of what Hornby would lose, you have to understand what it looked like when everything was working. In January 2001, Frank Martin arrived as CEO. Martin was a former marketing director at Hasbro and managing director of Denby Pottery, a man who understood brands and knew how to make people pay premium prices for things they didn't strictly need. He walked into a company that had already completed its move to China. The Margate factory floor was silent. The workers were gone. But the cost savings were real, and Martin saw exactly what to do with them. He transformed Hornby from a children's toy company into an adult hobby brand. The prices went up. The detail went up. The target customer shifted from the father buying a Christmas present for his son to the middle-aged man buying a precision model for himself. In November 2006, Martin acquired Airfix and Humbrol for £2.6 million. In May 2008, he added Corgi Classics for £7.5 million. Hornby now controlled model trains, model aircraft, model paints, and die-cast vehicles. The share price rose from 35 pence to over 250 pence. Martin had built a miniature empire of miniature things. The Hornby Visitor Centre opened in July 2010, attracting nearly 40,000 visitors per year to the old Margate site. The company's revenue in the financial year ending March 2012 hit £64.4 million, with a pre-tax profit of £3.2 million. It was the modern summit, the highest point the company had reached since the glory days of Binns Road. A Hornby train set under the Christmas tree remained one of the defining rituals of British childhood, a tradition cemented in the 1920s through relentless community building. The Meccano Guild, the Hornby Railway Company for train owners, and Meccano magazine published monthly for over 60 years. The Hornby Railway Collectors Association, founded in 1969, counted nearly 3,000 members worldwide. Sir Rod Stewart spent 26 years building a 124-foot HO-scale recreation of a 1940s American city. Pete Waterman, the music producer and former British Railways fireman, built what is probably the largest mainline O-gauge layout in the country, a recreation of Leamington Spa Station in a converted barn. His verdict on the hobby: modelling is better than getting Kylie to number one. And the Chinese-made Hornby products were, in fairness, extraordinary. They featured a level of detail that nothing from the Margate era had ever achieved. Finer mouldings, sharper printing, more accurate liveries. The factories in Guangdong province could produce things that British injection moulding machines of the 1980s simply couldn't. For a while, offshoring looked like the smartest decision anyone in the British toy industry had ever made. Standing at that summit in 2012, with 64 million in revenue and a product range that stretched from Hogwarts Express to Flying Scotsman, it would have taken a particular kind of pessimist to see what was coming. But the seeds had been sown years earlier, in fact more than a decade earlier, when the last container flat wagon in Eddie Stobart livery rolled off the Margate production line and the factory fell silent. The decisions had already been made. The consequences were still in the post. Chapter 6. The decision that couldn't be taken back. Manufacturing began moving from Margate to Guangdong province, China, in 1995. The process took 4 years. By 1999, it was complete. The decision was made under Peter Newey, chairman during the offshoring period. Newey later praised the move publicly, telling the financial press he had spent 5 years turning the once ailing company round, and that by outsourcing production, Hornby had managed to improve profit margins and maintain high quality. The specific CEO who executed the 1995 to 1999 transition has never been clearly identified in published sources. This was the management team from the 1981 buyout era, and their individual roles in the decision remain, oddly, undocumented. What is documented is the rationale. By the mid-1990s, Bachmann Industries, manufactured in China by parent company CADA, along with Dapol and Lima, were producing increasingly detailed models at lower prices. Hornby's Margate-made products couldn't compete on cost. The company described the decision as coming out of necessity. Without it, the company would not have survived in its present state. Perhaps that was true. Perhaps it wasn't. What is beyond dispute is the consequence. The last model made at the Margate factory was a container flat wagon in Eddie Stobart livery, documented by collector Pat Hammond in 1999. Approximately 400 jobs were lost as production ceased between 1995 and 1999. 400 people in a Kent coastal town who had spent their working lives assembling model trains, skilled work, precise work, the kind of work where your hands learn things your head couldn't teach, walked out of those gates for the last time. The factory that had employed 2,000 people across 3 shifts during the Christmas rush became a warehousing and packing facility. The moulds went east. The machinery went silent. The skill walked out the door and didn't come back. Hornby's primary Chinese manufacturer was Sandakan, based in Guangdong. By all accounts, they were an excellent partner. The relationship lasted 20 years and the products that emerged were genuinely remarkable. A level of detail which was, by the admission of even Hornby's critics, better than anything that had gone before. Finer mouldings, sharper livery printing, separately fitted components that Margate's tooling could never have achieved. The arithmetic looked unanswerable. Lower labour costs, higher detail, better margins. Chairman Newey's confidence seemed vindicated. But there was a structural vulnerability that nobody addressed, or perhaps nobody wanted to address. Hornby had one manufacturer. One. In one country. 8,000 miles from Margate. And they had no exclusive arrangement. Finance Director Nick Stone would later warn that Hornby does not have exclusive arrangements with its suppliers, and there is a risk that competition for manufacturing capacity could lead to delays. That warning came too late. The trap was already set. Simon Kohler, Hornby's former marketing manager, identified the root cause with the brutal clarity of hindsight. Hornby had put all eggs in one basket when it moved its manufacturing to China. One basket, one factory, one relationship, and in 2009 that basket was picked up by the competition. Chapter 7. The Ambush. In 2009, Cada Holdings Company Limited, the Hong Kong parent of Bachmann, Hornby's chief rival in the British 00 gauge market, acquired 100% of Sandakan for $8.5 million. Hornby's biggest competitor now owned its sole manufacturer. Consider what that means. Imagine a car manufacturer discovering that the only factory making its engines has just been bought by the company trying to put it out of business. Imagine a publisher learning that its only printer now belongs to its rival. The conflict of interest isn't subtle, it's existential. The consequences arrived with grinding inevitability. By 2013 to 2014, Sandakan's delivery performance had collapsed to approximately 60% of orders fulfilled. 60%. 4 in 10 orders simply didn't arrive. Chairman Roger Canham's annual statements became a grim annual ritual. This year has once again been one dominated by the continued supply chain disruption. Models promised for Christmas arrived in February. Products shown in catalogues never appeared at all. Retailers who depended on Hornby stock for their most profitable selling season found empty shelves where the Flying Scotsman should have been. In 2014, Hornby paid £500,000 to exit the Sandakan relationship, effectively paying to escape its own manufacturer. The negotiation was lengthy and complex, with delays in releasing moulds and tools. When you've sent your tooling to a factory on the other side of the world, getting it back requires cooperation from people who may no longer have any reason to cooperate. Post-Sandakan, Hornby scrambled to diversify. New manufacturers were engaged, refined, talent, and Zindart in China, microplastics in India. But diversifying a supply chain is not the same as owning one. The institutional knowledge that Sandakan had built over 20 years, the understanding of Hornby's specific tolerances, its particular requirements, the accumulated craft of producing these precise tiny machines, couldn't be transferred overnight. It took years. And during those years, Hornby bled. While Hornby was fighting for survival 8,000 miles from its customers, Peco was running 3 shifts in beer. Same building, same workforce, same village. When an order came in, it was fulfilled from stock manufactured on-site by people who had made the same products for decades. When a quality issue arose, the designer walked across the factory floor and spoke to the person running the mould. When demand surged, the factory responded, not in weeks or months, but in days. The contrast wasn't theoretical. It was playing out in real time, in the same hobby for the same customers. And it was about to get worse. Because Hornby's supply chain crisis was only half the story. The other half was hiding inside the models themselves, in the metal, at the molecular level, waiting to emerge. Chapter 8. When the models crumbled to dust. Zinc pest. The German word is zinc pest. It is a destructive intergranular corrosion process affecting zinc alloys containing impurities, primarily lead. First identified in 1923 in Germany, it attacks not the surface of a casting, but its internal structure, working at the boundaries between crystal grains in the alloy. Lead impurities, even at concentrations as low as 0.01% by weight, segregate to those grain boundaries. Moisture activates an electrochemical process. Lead acts as a cathodic site, initiating selective attack. The impurities are deposited between crystal types, physically pushing the crystals apart from the inside. Microcracks propagate along weakened grain boundaries under residual stress. The practical result is horrifying to anyone who has spent £100 or £200 on a model locomotive. Affected castings swell, they bloat, they warp, they crack, and eventually they crumble to powder. In terminal cases, models become like an eggshell, almost too fragile to pick up. Some have been described as violently exploding in response to stress and temperature change. Humidity above 65% accelerates the process. Temperature fluctuations worsen it. And there is no cure. Once zinc pest has begun, the process is irreversible. Your model is dying, and nothing can save it. The alloy in question is zamac, or, in its British variant, mazak, zinc alloyed with approximately 4% aluminium plus traces of magnesium and copper. Developed in 1929 by the New Jersey Zinc Company using 99.99% pure zinc, zamac is perfectly safe when manufactured correctly. The problem arises when zinc purity falls below that threshold, allowing contamination by lead, cadmium, or tin. Zinc ore deposits commonly occur alongside lead. Separation to the required purity is expensive, and in a cost-driven manufacturing environment, expensive processes are the first to be cut. Here is the bitter irony at the heart of this scandal. Hornby's own parent company, Meccano Limited, had already solved this problem once before. Pre-war and wartime dinky toys suffered catastrophically from zinc pest, particularly models from 1938 to 1941. Factory contamination was the culprit. Workers at Binns Road swept up waste metal from lead figures and threw it into the mazak melt. Lead tags from alloy supply bags were tossed in. Lead foil from cigarette packets was recycled into the casting pot. Some pre-war models started falling apart by the time their boxes reached the toy shops. After the war, Meccano Limited conducted extensive metallurgical research. Every batch of alloy was tested for purity. Post-war Hornby Dublo and Dinky toys were almost totally free of the problem. The knowledge existed. The problem was solved. Solved by the same company, in the same factory, with the same brand name, 70 years before the problem returned. And when manufacturing moved to China half a century later, that hard-won knowledge was apparently lost. Or ignored. Or simply never communicated to factories where high workforce turnover and cost-cutting pressures created exactly the conditions for contamination. A single worker adding scrap metal containing lead to a melt could contaminate an entire batch. Lead contamination at even less than 0.1% triggers the disease. None of the Margate-produced zamac chassis ever suffered from zinc pest. Not one. The worst affected era of Chinese Hornby production appears to be approximately 2005 to 2012. The most notorious victim was the Class 31, the Brush Type 2 diesel, catalogue numbers R2420 and RR2421. Chassis blocks expanded, cracked and splitting body shells apart. One collector reported online his R2421 failed in 2012, and his R2420 collapsed in October 2016. Funny how this was not sorted out by Hornby and the Chinese makers, he wrote. The anger was quiet but deep. The Class 31 wasn't alone. The T9 Greyhound 440 suffered motor mount casting failures. One collector reported that all 5 of his T9 Greyhounds were affected. The Railroad 9 F210 saw motor mounts swelling and crumbling. The Class 50, the L1264T, the Royal Scot R2629, the Bullard Pacific bogies. Even Thomas Range models, including Toby, children's toys rotting from the inside. The hobbyist community documented the crisis with the meticulous precision you would expect from people who build scale models to tolerances of fractions of a millimetre. A dedicated thread on RMWeb, the UK's largest model railway forum, titled Zinc Pest, Mazak Rot, the affected models list, was started in June 2017 and accumulated over 219 replies and 53 followers. A community-compiled document, the Mazak Rot List version 2.0, was published in April 2022, cataloguing every known affected model. On the Model Railway Forum, a thread titled Mazak Rot, Should Hornby Have Been Held Accountable?, debated the company's legal and ethical responsibility. One contributor stated, "There are many locomotives that I will not purchase due to the stain of their checkered past." A cottage industry emerged to serve the damage. Peters Spares began manufacturing brass replacement motor mounts. Tim Shackleton of Hornby magazine published a detailed guide on Class 31 chassis rebuilds. Forum members cannibalised old Lima chassis to repair stricken Hornby models. Models that had cost £100 or £200 were rendered worthless. And Hornby's response? Hornby never issued a formal public statement, never issued a recall, never published a press release. Forum users consistently noted, never seen any official statement about it. The company did quietly conduct chassis exchanges for the Class 31, replacement production runs were released, and some collectors received new chassis within weeks. But for other affected models, the 9F, the T9, the Royal Scot, no replacements were offered. The company's legal position, as one forum user observed, was that these products were classified as toys, and lasting a year was regarded as sufficient. Adult hobbyist products priced at hundreds of pounds, legally treated as children's playthings. The community that generated 90% of Hornby's profits was watching its collections rot from the inside. And the company that had built its name on the promise of a train set under the Christmas tree, something you'd keep, something that would last, something you'd pass to your own children, had nothing to say. Chapter 9. The Long Unraveling. The numbers tell the story with the cold clarity that numbers always bring when the story underneath them is one with human consequence. Financial year 2012. Revenue £64.4 million. Profit £3.2 million. The Summit. Financial year 2014. Revenue declining. Loss of £4.5 million. The Sandakan supply crisis at full force. Financial year 2016. Revenue £55.8 million. Loss of £5.7 million. Shares dropped more than 50% in a single year. Financial year 2017. Revenue £47.4 million. Loss of £6.3 million. Phoenix Asset Management acquired a 55.2% stake, valuing the entire company at just £27.4 million. Financial year 2018. Revenue £35.7 million. Loss of £7.6 million. The lowest point. 8 consecutive years of losses. 8 years in which the company that Frank Hornby had built from 5 borrowed pounds and a tin plate workshop simply could not stop the bleeding. Frank Martin departed in April 2013, the CEO who had presided over the peak but inherited the offshoring that would destroy it. Roger Canham served as executive chairman for nearly a year. Richard Ames arrived as CEO in April 2014, previously a director at Ladbrokes, the bookmaker. An industry outsider leading a company whose customers could tell you the difference between a Bullard Light Pacific and a rebuilt merchant navy at 50 paces. He was replaced in October 2017 by Lyndon Davies, a former Mettoy employee and founder of Oxford Diecast, installed by Phoenix Asset Management alongside returning veterans Simon Kohler and Tim Mulhall. Davies stepped down in April 2024 for health reasons. The current CEO is Oliver Rayburn, formerly of Paperchase, the stationery chain. 5 CEOs in 11 years, each one arriving with a plan. Each one discovering that the fundamental problem was structural, not managerial. You cannot manage your way out of a supply chain you don't control. The COVID lockdown of 2020 offered a brief, strange reprieve. Trapped at home, people rediscovered hobbies. Model railway sales surged across the industry. Hornby reported its first profit in 8 years, but the boom was borrowed time. By financial year 2024, revenue stood at £56.2 million, but losses had ballooned to £11.4 million, with net debt of £14.3 million. The share price, which had touched 250 pence in the Martin era, fell to around 14 or 15 pence by early 2025, having dropped 63% in 12 months alone. The 52-week range showed a high of 40 pence and a low of just 6 pence. On 10th April 2025, Hornby was delisted from AM, with 99.43% of shareholders voting in favour. The board stated that public listing costs and regulatory burden were no longer justifiable given limited share liquidity. The company re-registered as Hornby Limited, a private limited company. Major shareholders at delisting included Castlenow, the successor to Phoenix, at 54.89%, Aurora at 14.9%, and Fraser's Group, Mike Ashley's company, at 9.1%. From the London Stock Exchange to a private limited company. From 2,000 workers across 3 shifts to a rented office on a site it once filled. From Frank Hornby's 5-acre Liverpool factory to a supply chain scattered across Guangdong province, overseen by executives who had never assembled a model locomotive in their lives. Richard Ames, during his tenure as CEO, confirmed the position that remains true as of 2026. The group sources all of its model railway products from China. Every single one. Chapter 10. Precision at 1/100th of a millimetre. While Hornby's collection was crumbling and its share price was dissolving, Peco was investing in a Sodic ALC 400G iGroove Edition wire erosion machine, one of only 4 in the United Kingdom. The same technology used in Formula One and aerospace manufacturing, achieving precision to 1/100th of a millimetre. Installed in a tool room in a Devon fishing village, operated by a team of 10 dedicated staff who maintain 1,600 mould and press tools. That single detail, 1/100th of a millimetre, in beer, contains the entire argument. The beer factory sits on a 9 to 10 acre site on the hillside above the village, with panoramic views of Lyme Bay and the Jurassic Coast stretching to Portland Bill. The manufacturing process combines decades of accumulated craft knowledge with cutting-edge technology. 4 Sodic EDM wire erosion machines, CNC machinery, advanced 3D printing for rapid prototyping, recycled plastic processed on-site. A new 260 square metre factory space opened around 2021, housing point assembly lines, miniature welding stations, packing and printing operations. Paul Hitchcock, the company's innovations manager, put the philosophy into plain English. Having all of our manufacturing in-house is a huge market advantage, something that was very apparent during the pandemic as we're not reliant on overseas suppliers. Of course, it's important that we continue investing and innovating. That pandemic reference is not incidental. When COVID-19 shut down global supply chains in 2020, companies relying on Chinese manufacturing faced disruption precisely when demand surged. Peco saw demand increase by as much as 30% and fulfilled every order from its Devon factory without interruption. The same crisis that gave Hornby a brief borrowed profit boom exposed the fundamental fragility of offshored supply chains. Peco didn't just survive the stress test, it thrived during it. The factory produces over 1.6 miles of model railway track every day. Peco estimates its total production since founding would be enough track to circle the circumference of the Earth. The product range now spans 20 track systems covering standard and narrow gauge from Z gauge at 1 to 220 scale through N, TT 120, OO, HO, O, and gauge 1, plus multiple narrow gauges. Over 2,000 products in the catalogue, stocked by more than 300 independent retailers, distributed to over 35 countries. 81 staff work in daily production. 14 technical and engineering employees. Factory manager Tim Vincent leads tours of a facility that has nothing to hide. Sales manager Steve Haynes gives interviews with the quiet confidence of a man whose product speaks for itself. Will Lane serves as Chief Operating Officer. Some workers have been with the company for over 50 years. In a village of 1,283 people, Peco is by far the largest employer. The company has grown through strategic acquisition, ratio plastic models. In 1996, Wills Kits in 1998, Parkside Standard Gauge Kits in 2017, Harbin Hobbies of Edinburgh in March 2025. All manufacturing is conducted at Beer and at a second Peco factory at Buckfastleigh, Devon. Everything stays in the county. Everything stays under control. Peco's turnover for the financial year ending April 2024 was approximately £9 million, with gross profit of approximately £3 million and cash holdings of approximately £4 million. Export revenue exceeds £2 million annually. These numbers are modest beside Hornby's £56 million, but Peco carries no net debt. It has no history of catastrophic losses, no revolving door of CEOs, no supply chain held hostage by a competitor, no models crumbling to dust on collectors' shelves. The company has stated a target to double turnover in 3 to 5 years. There is no reason to doubt them. It would be dishonest to present Peco as immune to difficulty. In November 2025, Pecorama, the visitor attraction that had been part of the beer landscape for 50 years, featuring the Beer Heights Light Railway opened by Reverend W.V. Audrey in 1975, closed due to ongoing financial losses. The attraction was profitable only about 4 months per year, with the remaining months requiring subsidy from PECO's manufacturing income. Some staff took voluntary redundancy. A Save Pecorama Facebook group formed immediately. Peco indicated hope of reopening in a new format. Even a successful British manufacturer faces real economic pressures. The difference is in how those pressures are met. Peco closed an attraction to protect its manufacturing core. Hornby hollowed out its manufacturing core to protect its margins. One company sacrificed the periphery. The other sacrificed the foundation. Chapter 11. 2 tracks. The Margate factory buildings still stand. In 2017, the entire site was purchased by Jeremy Hosking, born 1958, net worth £375 million, co-founder of Marathon Asset Management, and a railway enthusiast who owns over 25 full-sized locomotives, for £2.25 million. He is developing the One-to-One collection, a full-sized railway heritage museum in the former warehouse building, featuring locomotives including LNERA 4 or Pacific number 44464 Bittern. Frank Martin, Hornby's former CEO, the man who presided over the peak, is a director of Locomotive Storage Limited, overseeing the museum project. An open weekend in 2019 attracted 2,500 paying guests. Hornby's offices moved back to the original 1954-built offices on the Margate site in 2019, after 4 years at Discovery Park in Sandwich. The company now operates Wonderworks, a refurbished 11,000 square foot visitor centre launched in November 2023, On site as a tenant of Locomotive Storage Limited. A tenant. In the factory it once filled with 2,000 workers. A small reshoring effort began in 2012 when Airfix quick-build kits were manufactured by Plastek in New Haven, East Sussex, producing 8,000 kits per week. But the model railway products, the trains, the carriages, the wagons, the locomotives that carry the Hornby name, every one of them comes from China. As of 2026, that remains the case. 230 miles to the southwest, the Peco factory hums on its hillside above Beer. The fishing boats are winched up the shingle. The Jurassic coast stretches towards Portland Bill. Inside the tool room, the sodic wire erosion machines cut to tolerances that would satisfy a Formula One engineer. 81 workers produce 1.5 miles of track every day. 3 generations of Pritchards have overseen the same operation in the same village, serving the same hobby. Their Twitter biography says it plainly. Proudly still manufacturing in the UK. The two companies occupied the same market, served the same customers, faced the same competitive pressures. One chose to send its manufacturing 8,000 miles away and discovered that distance has consequences. That when you can't walk across a factory floor and watch your product being made, you lose something that spreadsheets don't measure. Control, knowledge, trust. The accumulated understanding of how to make a thing properly held in the hands of people who've done it for decades. The other chose to stay, to invest in better machine rather than cheaper labour, to absorb the higher costs that come with manufacturing in Britain, and trust that quality, reliability, and the ability to fulfil orders when the world falls apart would prove their own reward. The model railways are miniature. The tracks are tiny. The locomotives weigh a few ounces. But the question they pose is full-sized, and it echoes well beyond any hobby shop or exhibition hall. What is a company, really? Is it a set of brands to be optimized? A supply chain to be arbitraged? A share price to be managed quarter by quarter? Or is it something more stubborn and more human? A place where people make things year after year, getting better at it, passing their knowledge to the next pair of hands? Frank Hornby knew the answer. He built Meccano, Hornby trains and Dinky toys in the same Liverpool factory with the same workforce for 40 years. Sidney Pritchard knew it too. He built Peco in Devon and never left. Somewhere between Liverpool and Guangdong, the answer got lost. In Beer, it never did.